The old cabin's floor didn't match its walls, and the dog refused to leave the spot where the numbers stopped making sense. A steel door groaned open beneath the house as smoke drifted through the cellar. Earl's flashlight shook across rows of sealed boxes while Maverick stood rigid, staring into the darkness beyond. Somewhere above them, a branch snapped in the woods. Then the dog growled at something Earl couldn't see. What do you think was hidden down there? The shotgun crack of an engine backfiring tore through the truck stop at 3:17 in the morning. Earl Dawson came awake before his eyes opened. His right hand shot under the driver's seat, fingers clawing for a rifle that had not been there in 22 years. His left shoulder slammed into the steering wheel. His boots scraped hard against the floor mat. For one blind second, the rain on the windshield was tracer fire. The glow of the diesel pumps was a burning road outside Baghdad, and the shadow moving past his window was not a trucker carrying coffee. It was contact. Then something warm and heavy pressed against his ribs. Maverick. The old German shepherd had wedged himself between Earl and the passenger door, his black and tan body tense but steady, one paw braced on Earl's thigh. He did not bark. He never barked at the ghosts. He only leaned in, breathing slow through his nose, amber eyes fixed on Earl's face like he was waiting for the man to come back from wherever he had gone. Earl's hand stayed under the seat. His fingers closed around an empty fast food wrapper. He blinked. The truck stop came back piece by piece, rain ticking on the roof of the old Ford pickup, a flickering sign over the pumps, the sour smell of cold coffee in a paper cup, a semi rolling past with chains clinking under its trailer. Western Montana, not Iraq. Gravel lot, not a roadblock. Maverick's fur under his palm, not sand against his cheek. Earl swallowed hard. Clear, he whispered. Maverick's ears softened. Earl sat there in the dark, breathing through his nose until his chest stopped fighting him. The heater had quit sometime after midnight, and the inside of the windshield was fogged white around the edges. His blanket had slid off his knees. His right leg had gone numb from sleeping behind the wheel. Sleeping. That was what people called it when their eyes closed. Earl had another word for it. Waiting. He looked at the dashboard clock again. 3:19. 2 minutes had passed. His body felt like it had run 5 miles in full gear. Outside, the truck stop was half alive. A cashier moved behind the glass doors of the convenience store. 2 long-haul rigs idled near the diesel island. A tired woman in a red coat hurried across the lot with her collar pulled up against the rain. Nobody looked at the old man in the dented pickup parked beyond the light pole. Nobody looked at the dog watching from the passenger seat. That was all right with Earl. After a while, not being seen felt easier. He reached into the pocket of his faded field jacket and pulled out the orange pill bottle. Lisinopril. 3 tablets left. He shook one into his palm, broke it with his thumbnail, and took half dry because the water bottle in the cup holder had frozen at the bottom. Maverick watched him. "Don't start," Earl muttered. "Doc said half is better than none." The dog blinked once, unimpressed. Earl almost smiled. Almost. A folded paper sat on the dash beneath the windshield wiper receipt, its corner damp from condensation. He had read it 6 times since sundown, but his eyes went to it again anyway. Final notice. The lot manager had left it tucked beneath his wiper at 9:40 p.m., right after Earl came back from washing up in the restroom sink. 48 hours to move the vehicle or it would be towed at owner's expense. Unauthorized overnight parking. Repeated violations. No further warnings. Owner's expense. Earl gave a quiet breath that might have been a laugh if there had been any humor left in it. The Ford was not much to look at. 1996, dull blue, rust along the wheel wells, one cracked mirror patched with silver tape, but it was the last roof he owned. The bed held a tarp, 2 fuel cans, a toolbox, a sleeping bag, a duffel with 3 shirts, and a plastic bin full of things he could not bring himself to throw away. His wife's Bible, her garden gloves, a framed picture of them outside Fort Hood before the second deployment, back when his beard was black and her hand fit through the crook of his arm like it belonged there. June had been gone 3 years. The hospital bills had stayed. Then the tax letters. Then the bank letters. Then the county auction notice on the house in Missoula, where June had planted lavender by the porch steps. Earl had stood in that yard the morning they changed the locks and watched strangers carry out the kitchen table he had built himself. He had not raised his voice. He had not begged. Men like Earl knew how to lose things standing up. Maverick shifted, his bad rear leg stretching awkwardly against the bench seat. The dog had his own old damage, a stiffness that showed worse in cold weather. Earl had found him outside a rescue kennel near Helena, passed over by families who wanted younger dogs with clean medical charts. Maverick had stared at Earl through the chain-link fence with the quiet patience of a soldier waiting for orders that might never come. The paper on his kennel had said retired working dog, not suitable for active service, rear leg injury. Earl had read that and said, "Same, buddy." They had left together that afternoon. Now they sat in a freezing pickup behind a truck stop that wanted them gone. Earl reached under the seat again, this time slowly, and pulled out the flat metal tin where he kept his money. Not much worth hiding, but habit was habit. He counted it by the dim dashboard glow. $213. A gas card, with maybe 16 left on it. A folded VA appointment slip he had missed. His old military ID, the plastic cloudy at the edges, his younger face looking back with a hard jaw and eyes that did not yet know what they would carry. Maverick gave a low sound. Not a growl. A warning from deep in the chest. Earl froze. His eyes lifted to the side mirror. A white county service truck rolled slowly along the far edge of the lot, tires whispering through wet gravel. Yellow light from the pump canopy slid over its hood and disappeared. It passed once, turned near the dumpsters, then came back slower. Earl did not move his head. Only his eyes. The truck stopped behind the convenience store. A man got out in a rain jacket and walked toward the office door. Earl let out the breath he had been holding. "Not for us," he said. Maverick kept watching until the man vanished inside. That was another thing about the dog. He noticed what Earl noticed, and sometimes what Earl missed. A footstep in brush. A hand too close to a pocket. A car moving without headlights. The world had taken Maverick's speed, but not his mind. Earl rubbed the dog's neck, fingers finding the thick scar hidden beneath the fur near his shoulder. "We'll move at first light." The words hung there. Move where? He had asked himself that question for weeks. Shelters did not take dogs. Rooms cost more than he had. Friends from the old days had scattered into graves, divorces, pain pills, and quiet little apartments where nobody answered unknown numbers. His daughter in Oregon had her own life, and a husband who spoke to Earl like kindness was a chore. He had not called her. Pride, maybe. Shame, probably. Rain thickened, drumming harder on the cab. Earl turned the key halfway to check the battery. The radio flickered on with a burst of static, loud enough that his shoulders locked again. He snapped it off. In the sudden silence, he heard June's voice as clear as if she were sitting beside him. "You can't live by disappearing, Earl." He closed his eyes. On the passenger floor, beneath Maverick's paws, lay yesterday's newspaper from a diner outside Butte. Earl had taken it because the waitress said they were throwing it out. The front page was bad news like always. Prices up, fires west. Another argument in Washington. But the back pages had county auctions, farm sales, tax lots, things nobody wanted until somebody desperate read the fine print. He picked it up now because not sleeping required something for the hands. The paper crackled in the cold. His eyes moved over tractors, snowmobiles, a damaged hay trailer, a bank-owned storage unit in Kalispell. Then he stopped. The ad was small, boxed in crooked black lines. County tax auction, Idaho Panhandle, remote forest parcel with structure, 6 acres, A-frame cabin, as is. Minimum bid, $4,900, cash or certified funds only, no utilities verified, access road unmaintained. Below it was a grainy photograph, a steep roof beneath tall pines, a porch half swallowed by weeds, one dark window like an eye that had been waiting too long. Earl stared at it. Maverick leaned forward, nose twitching toward the paper, as if the ink itself carried a scent. Cheap for a reason, Earl said. The dog kept looking. Earl read the line again. Remote forest parcel, 6 acres, structure, no landlord, no lot manager, no bank officer standing on a porch with paperwork, no one telling him his truck had 48 hours before it disappeared too. Idaho was a long drive on bad gas, and worse luck. The cabin was probably rotten through. The road might be impassable. Winter was coming down from the mountains already. A man his age had no business buying a forgotten place in wet timber country with $200 in his pocket and a dog with a bad leg. Earl folded the paper carefully along the edge of the ad. Outside, rain ran silver down the windshield. For the first time all night, his hands were steady. Maverick lowered his head onto Earl's knee. Earl looked past the pumps, past the dark highway, toward a place he had never seen and might not survive. Maybe, he whispered, that's far enough. By noon the next day, Earl Dawson had sold the last thing he owned that still had any value. It was a compressor from his old shop days, red paint chipped down to bare metal, the kind of tool a man kept because it had earned a place beside him. A ranch mechanic outside Missoula gave him $400 cash and did not ask why Earl's hands stayed on the handle an extra second before letting go. Earl counted the bills once, folded them into the metal tin, and drove west with Maverick riding beside him. The Ford coughed hard climbing the passes. Rain turned to mist, then to low clouds snagged in the pine tops. By the time they crossed into Idaho, the land had changed. The mountains pressed closer. The roads narrowed. Timber rose on both sides like walls built by something older than men. Maverick kept his nose near the cracked passenger window, pulling in every smell the wet forest gave him. Earl did not talk much. He had wired nearly all of what he could scrape together to the county office that morning, enough to secure the tax auction parcel before anyone with more money noticed it. 6 acres, A-frame cabin, no utilities guaranteed, unmaintained road, no refunds. The clerk on the phone had sounded surprised anyone wanted it. You understand this is as is, Mr. Dawson? Yes, ma'am. And remote means remote. I've been remote before. There had been a pause then, not long, but long enough for her to stop reading from the form. Well, she had said, softer, you'll want good tires. He did not have good tires. Near evening, Earl pulled into a town called Pine Hollow, though it was hardly a town. A gas pump, a post office, a hardware store with antlers over the door, a grocery with a hand-painted sign that said Bennett's Market in green letters, faded by weather. Beyond that, nothing but ridgeline and timber under a gray sky. He parked at the market because the Ford's fuel gauge was leaning too close to empty, and his stomach had begun to fold in on itself. Maverick stepped down stiffly, his bad rear leg slow on the wet gravel. Earl waited, one hand near the dog's shoulder, but not touching until Maverick found his balance. The dog shook rain from his coat and looked toward the trees behind the store. Yeah, Earl murmured. I smell it too. Smoke. Cedar. Cold mud. something wild moving somewhere unseen. A bell above the door gave a tired jingle when Earl walked in. The place smelled of coffee, onions, old wood, and floor wax. Shelves leaned under canned goods and bags of feed. A rack near the counter held gloves, batteries, rope, and local maps yellowed at the folds. The woman behind the register looked up from a ledger. She was in her 60s, silver hair tied back, sleeves rolled to the elbow, glasses hanging from a chain. Her eyes went first to Earl's boots, then to the old field jacket, then to Maverick standing quietly at his left knee. "Dog's better mannered than most men who come through here," she said. "He's had training. So have you." Earl looked at her. She did not smile exactly, but one corner of her mouth moved. "Clara Bennett," she said. "This is my store." "Earl Dawson. Maverick," he added, when her eyes dropped to the dog. At the sound of his name, Maverick sat without being told. Clara came around the counter with a small paper bowl, filled it from a pitcher, and set it on the floor. Maverick glanced at Earl first. Earl gave a small nod. Only then did the dog drink. Clara noticed that too. "You passing through?" Earl picked up a tin of coffee, a loaf of bread, 2 cans of beans, and a small bag of dog food he could not really afford. "Bought a place north of here." Clara's hand stopped halfway back to the register. "North where?" "County Road 18. Then a logging cut marked Weller Spur." The store seemed to grow quieter, though nothing in it had moved. Clara looked toward the front window. Outside, rain slid down the glass in long crooked lines. "You bought Frank Weller's place." Earl set the cans on the counter. "That a problem?" "No." She rang one can, then the other. "Not legally." Earl waited. Clara did not fill the silence quickly. People who had lived long enough around mountains knew silence had uses. Finally she said, "Frank was a hard man to know. Came in twice a month. Paid cash. Bought beans, batteries, kerosene, sometimes radio parts if I could order them. Never asked for credit. Never asked for help. Sounds self-sufficient. He wasn't afraid of work. Wasn't afraid of winter either." Clara slid the bread into a paper sack. But Frank wasn't scared of the forest. Her eyes lifted to Earl's. He was scared of people finding him in it. Maverick stopped drinking. His ears rose. Earl saw it and turned just enough to catch the reflection in the window behind Clara. A black SUV was rolling past the market slowly, tires whispering through rain. Tinted windows. Clean body. Too clean for the road outside town. The SUV did not stop, but it slowed at Earl's truck before continuing down the street. Clara watched Earl watching it. "You expecting somebody?" "No." "Then remember the road to Weller's washes out after the second bend. You'll have to walk from there if the culvert's gone." Earl paid her in small bills. Clara added a box of matches and did not charge for them. When he looked at the receipt, she said, "Call it a welcome gift. I don't have a phone that works much. Then call it mountain manners." The road north turned from pavement to gravel, then from gravel to something that barely deserved a name. The Ford pushed through puddles deep enough to hide stones. Branches scraped both sides of the truck. Twice Earl had to get out and move fallen limbs. Maverick standing in the rain beside him, head turning from tree line to tree line. At the second bend, the road disappeared. The culvert had collapsed into a brown rush of water. Beyond it, the track climbed into timber, narrow and rutted and swallowed by ferns. Earl killed the engine. For a while he just sat there with both hands on the wheel. Then he reached behind the seat for the duffel. "Looks like we walk." The hike was only a quarter-mile on paper. In the rain, with a bad knee, a tired dog, 2 bags, and mud that sucked at his boots, it felt longer. Earl moved in short stages, stopping every 50 yards to listen. Not because he expected trouble, because part of him always expected trouble. Maverick ranged 10 feet ahead, never more. His nose worked the ground, then the air, then the ground again. At last, the trees opened. The cabin stood in a small clearing beneath wet pines, steep roof black with moss, porch sagging at one corner, windows boarded from inside. The A-frame looked less built than abandoned mid-thought, as if the forest had been chewing on it slowly for years and had not yet finished. Earl stood at the edge of the clearing. 6 acres, a roof, a door no one could legally order him out of. The feeling that rose in him was not joy. It was too tired for that. It was the careful, suspicious lift of a man seeing a bridge that might hold. The key from the county office stuck twice before the lock turned. The door opened with a damp groan. The smell came out first. Mouse droppings, wet wood, cold ashes, old fabric. The air of a place that had been closed too long with its memories still inside. Earl stepped in and swept his flashlight left to right. Clear left. Clear right. Corners. Windows. Ceiling. Maverick entered after him. Tail low. Body controlled. The floorboards creaked under their weight. In the living room, a stone fireplace rose from the center wall, broad and dark, its hearth stained with soot. Beside it lay a rusted coffee can, a broken chair, and a stack of newspapers curled with damp. Earl set down the duffel. Rain ticked through a leak into a metal pot someone had left on the kitchen floor years ago. Plink, plink, plink. Home, he said, though the word sounded uncertain in the room. He cleared a space near the least rotten wall, laid out the sleeping bag, fed Maverick half a can of beans mixed with kibble, and ate the other half cold with a pocket knife. Darkness settled fast in the trees, pressing itself against the boarded windows until the cabin felt buried. Later, Earl lay on his back with his jacket rolled under his head. He did not sleep. The wind moved around the A-frame, pushing through cracks with a low whistle. Somewhere in the walls, mice scratched. The old cabin shifted and answered itself in small wooden pops. Maverick stood near the fireplace, not pacing, not restless, standing. His head was lowered toward the stone hearth, ears forward, nose working along the seam where rock met floor. "Mav," Earl whispered. The dog did not look back. Earl pushed himself up on one elbow. Maverick took one step closer to the hearth, then sat. Rain tapped the roof. The pot in the kitchen kept time. Plink, plink, plink. Maverick stared at the dark stones beneath the fireplace as if something under the house had just breathed. Earl did not move right away. He listened first. That was how old training lived in a man, not in speeches, not in medals tucked into drawers, in the pause before action, in the way a hand stayed still while the ears did the work. Rain on roof, water in pot, wind through broken trim, mice in the wall, Maverick's breathing, nothing else. Still, the dog did not turn from the fireplace. Earl eased out of the sleeping bag and planted his boots on the floorboards. The wood felt soft under his left heel. Too soft. He shifted his weight, careful, and reached for the flashlight beside his knee. The beam cut across the room. The stone fireplace stood black and heavy in the center of the cabin, built from river rock and gray mortar, too wide for a place this small. Its shadow filled the wall behind it. The hearthstones were cracked, but not loose. Ash lay in the firebox, old enough to have turned pale and powdery. Maverick lowered his nose to the seam where the hearth met the floor. A low rumble moved in his chest. "Easy," Earl whispered. The dog stopped rumbling, but he did not back away. Earl crouched beside him. His right knee popped loud enough to make him wince. He ran his fingers along the edge of the hearth. Cold stone. Damp grit. A line of packed dust where nobody had swept in years. Nothing. Not yet. He tapped the nearest board with 2 knuckles. Solid. He tapped another. Solid. Maverick pressed his nose between 2 dark floorboards and inhaled hard. Then the wind hit the cabin. A long gust slammed into the north wall, rattling the boarded window with a flat wooden crack. Earl dropped before he knew he had moved. Chest to floor, left arm tucked, right hand reaching for a weapon that was not there. His cheek hit dust. His eyes fixed on the gap beneath the kitchen cabinet. For half a second, the cabin disappeared again. He smelled burned rubber and hot metal, heard a radio call breaking apart in static, saw a white flash beyond a convoy windshield. Then Maverick was there. The dog came low, not standing over him, not crowding him. He slid beside Earl and pushed his head under Earl's wrist, forcing the old man's hand into fur instead of empty air. Earl's fingers closed. Coarse hair. Warm skin. A heartbeat. He dragged in one breath, then another. The cabin returned around him. No dust cloud rolling over a road. No shouting. No one screaming for a medic. Only rain. Only an old house. Only Maverick, steady as a sandbag wall. Earl stayed on the floor until the shaking passed from his hands into the boards beneath him. "Clear," he said at last, the word rough in his throat. Maverick gave one slow wag of his tail. Earl pushed himself up, embarrassed though there was no one there to see it. He brushed dust from his beard and looked at the fireplace again. "Tomorrow," he told the dog. "We check it tomorrow." Maverick did not seem satisfied. Morning came gray and cold. The rain had thinned to mist, leaving the clearing soaked and silent. Low clouds hung between the pines. Earl stepped onto the porch with his coffee in a tin cup and watched vapor rise from the ground like the forest was exhaling. He worked because work was safer than thinking. First, he set the cabin the way he wanted it. Not pretty. Functional. Sleeping bag against the interior wall, away from windows. Food bin up on a shelf. Water jug near the back door. Hatchet within reach but not in the open. Flashlight tied to a nail with cord. Matches sealed in a coffee can. 2 exits checked. One path cleared to the tree line. Another marked behind the shed with broken branches pointing downhill. Maverick followed every step, limping slightly but alert. Earl marked the property like he would have marked a temporary position. Not with flags. Nothing obvious. A strip of cloth tucked at knee height. A bent fern. 3 stones placed near the creek bed. Small things a stranger would miss, but a man returning in the dark could read. At noon, he found the spring. It seeped from a mossy bank 30 yards behind the cabin, cold and clean enough to make his teeth ache. He filled both jugs and studied the slope above it. Runoff patterns, animal tracks, deer mostly, raccoon, something heavier near the mud, but old. He made a mental map. Water, wood, shelter, high ground to the east, deadfall to the west. No good LZ anywhere close. The thought came without asking, and he almost laughed. "No helicopters coming for us, Mav." The dog was standing near the trees, nose lifted. Earl followed his line of sight. For one breath, he saw nothing. Then a flash of movement through the pines. Too square for a deer. Too dark for bark. Gone. Earl set the water jug down without a sound. Maverick's ears went forward. A vehicle engine turned over somewhere far down the washed-out road. Not loud, not close, but there. Earl moved to the edge of the clearing and crouched behind a cedar trunk, watching through the branches. His body remembered angles before his mind named them. Don't stand in the open. Don't silhouette yourself. Watch the gaps, not the trees. The engine idled for almost a minute, then faded. By the time Earl made it to the washed-out bend, all he found was fresh tire sign pressed into the mud beyond where his truck had stopped the day before. Wide tires. Good tread. Someone had driven as far as the collapse, waited, and turned around. Earl stood over the tracks while mist gathered on his jacket. Maverick sniffed once, then sneezed sharply, his lips pulled back just enough to show teeth. "Yeah," Earl said quietly. "Not local." Back at the cabin, he checked the door, then the windows, then the tree line again. He tried to tell himself it was nothing. A hunter. A utility worker. Someone curious about the old Weller place. But Clara's words came back. Frank wasn't scared of the forest. Earl went inside before dusk and started on the floor near the fireplace. Rot had eaten 3 boards along the west wall, but the boards beside the hearth were different. Older, darker, and fastened with square nails that had been driven deep. He pried at one with his knife and the blade slipped, cutting a shallow line across his thumb. Maverick stepped forward. "I'm fine." The dog ignored the words and nosed his hand until Earl wiped the blood on his jeans. Then Maverick lowered his head to the same seam as before. He sniffed. Once. Twice. Then he began to paw at the boards. Slow at first. Scratch. Scratch. Then harder. "Mav, leave it." The dog stopped, looked at Earl, then went right back to it. His front claws dug into the thin black gap. Wood dust jumped. One nail squealed. Maverick scraped with such focus that his injured rear leg trembled from holding balance. "Maverick." This time Earl's voice carried command. The dog froze, but he did not step away. Earl crouched and aimed the flashlight into the crack. There was nothing to see but darkness. Then Maverick hit the board again with one hard paw. A sharp sound came from below. Not wood, not stone. Metal. Earl's spine went still. Maverick scraped once more, harder, and a bead of blood appeared near one claw where the nail had split. "Hey, enough." Earl caught the dog's paw gently. Maverick let him, but his eyes stayed locked on the floor. Earl wrapped the paw in a strip torn from an old towel, tying it with hands that suddenly felt too careful. Outside, the forest darkened. Inside, the fireplace stones held their black silence. Earl sat back on his heels, staring at the narrow seam Maverick had opened. For the first time since buying the place, he no longer wondered whether Frank Weller had hidden something in the cabin. He wondered who else knew it was there. Earl did not touch the floor again that night. He moved the sleeping bag away from the fireplace and set it against the back wall, where he could see the front door, the kitchen window, and the shadowed edge of the hearth without turning his head. Maverick lay beside him with the towel still wrapped around his paw, but even half asleep, the dog kept his nose pointed toward the dark stones. The cabin made its small night sounds. Wood contracting. Rainwater sliding from the roof. A branch scraping the siding in slow, patient strokes. Earl listened to all of it. At 1:12, he thought he heard tires. He sat up, already holding the flashlight. Nothing followed. No engine. No door. No footstep in wet leaves. Still, he waited 20 minutes before lying back down. At 2:40, the wind shifted, and a gap in the boards whistled a thin note that went straight through him. It became a mortar whistle for one breath, then a kettle boiling in June's kitchen, then only wind again. His hand was pressed flat to the floor before he knew he had moved. Maverick touched his wrist with his nose. Earl did not say clear this time. He only nodded once in the dark. Morning came without warmth. A pale gray light filled the cabin, showing every stain in the ceiling and every warped board underfoot. Earl made coffee in a dented pot over a camp stove and shared a slice of bread with Maverick. The dog took his half gently, then lifted the bandaged paw, placing it against Earl's boot, as if making a point. I know, Earl said. You found it first. He spent the first hour checking the outside perimeter. The tire tracks at the washed-out bend were still there, softened at the edges by rain, but not gone. Earl crouched over them and held his hand above the mud, measuring width by habit. Heavy vehicle, new tread, not a logging truck, too narrow, SUV or pickup with highway tires. He walked the tree line in a slow arc, never straight, never predictable. Old reflexes had their own rhythm. Stop, listen, look behind, move again. Maverick followed close, his limp more noticeable now, but his attention never broke. Near a fallen cedar, Earl found a cigarette butt pressed into the mud. White filter, fresh paper, no rain damage. He picked it up with 2 sticks and placed it in an empty matchbox. A hunter would have left boot prints near it. A surveyor would have left flagging tape. Whoever stood there had come quiet, stayed under cover, and left before dawn. Back inside, Earl took the newspaper ad from his jacket pocket and laid it on the kitchen counter. The cabin photograph stared up at him, grainy and useless. He turned it over and drew a rough rectangle with a carpenter's pencil. He had spent years reading structures before touching them. Bridges, culverts, blast walls, damaged roofs after storms. A building told the truth if a man had enough patience to ask right. Earl stepped outside with a tape measure he had found rusting in Frank Weller's shed. The numbers were faded, but they held. From the east wall to the west wall, the cabin measured 42 feet, 6 inches. He checked again, 42 feet, 6 inches. He moved around the back, boots sinking in black earth. The rear wall bowed slightly beneath the weight of wet moss on the roof. He measured from corner to corner, then marked the foundation stones with chalk. Inside, he measured the living room, 16 feet. Kitchen, 8 feet. Bedroom, 9 feet. Wall thickness, give or take. He wrote each number on a torn flap from a cardboard box. Then he added them. His pencil stopped. He added them again. Maverick sat near the fireplace, watching him. Earl looked from the cardboard to the stone chimney. No, he muttered. He measured the living room again, slower this time, hooking the tape at the far wall and walking backward. The metal tape rasped softly in the cold room. 16 feet, 3 inches. He measured the bedroom wall, 9 feet, 1 inch. He measured the outside again in the rain, mud streaking his pants, breath smoking in front of him. The answer did not change. The cabin was almost 9 feet longer on the outside than it was on the inside. Earl stood in the clearing with the tape measure hanging from one hand. The forest pressed close around the little house. Pine trunks stood black with rain. Somewhere far off, a raven called once and went silent. 9 feet. A man could lose a closet in bad remodeling. Maybe a storage nook. Maybe an old pantry sealed behind paneling. But not 9 feet through the center of a cabin. Not under a fireplace that was too wide. Not with a dog bleeding over the seam. Earl went to the trap door in the kitchen floor. It had been half hidden beneath a curled sheet of linoleum. The ring pull was rusted flat, and when he lifted it, the wood groaned like it resented being remembered. A smell rose from below. Wet clay, mold, cold stone. Maverick stood, but did not follow right away. Stay until I call. The dog did not like it. Earl could see that in the set of his ears. He climbed down the ladder one rung at a time, flashlight clenched between his teeth, boots searching for the next step before trusting weight to it. The cellar was shallow enough that he had to duck. Roots hung from cracks in the foundation like old wires. The dirt floor was damp, packed hard in some places, soft in others. He swept the beam across the space. Stone foundation, wood joists, old jars, a broken shovel, mouse tunnels along the wall. Then the beam hit concrete. Earl stopped. Directly beneath the fireplace stood a wall that should not have been there. It rose from the dirt floor to the underside of the joists, gray and blunt and ugly. Not old foundation stone, not poured concrete from the original build. Cinder block, rough mortar smeared between joints, built fast, built by someone who wanted function, not beauty. Earl stepped closer. His shoulder brushed a hanging root, and dirt fell down the back of his collar. He ignored it. The cinder block wall was nearly 9 feet across. He ran his palm over it. Cold. Dry in the center despite the damp cellar. That meant there was space behind it. Airflow somewhere. A pocket the moisture had not reached. Above him, Maverick barked once. Not loud, a single warning. Earl killed the flashlight by instinct. Darkness swallowed the cellar. He held still, one hand against the cinder block, the other near the knife on his belt. A floorboard creaked overhead, then another. Maverick moved across the room above him, claws clicking. Not running, tracking. Earl listened. No human step followed. The dog came to the trapdoor and looked down, his shape a black cutout against the gray cabin light. "What is it?" Earl whispered. Maverick gave a low whine, then turned and went back toward the fireplace. Earl switched the flashlight on again. The beam trembled only once. He lifted it higher, toward the point where the cinder block met the joists. There, in the upper right corner, a narrow gap had opened where mortar had cracked away. He picked up a rusted hammer from the cellar floor and tapped the block beneath it. Thud. He tapped again. Thud. Then Maverick struck the floor above with his good front paw. A hollow metallic note rang through the wall. Not stone, not wood. Metal. Earl lowered the hammer. The sound faded into the cellar, thin and cold, like a bell rung under the earth. He looked at the crude wall, at the dark crack in the mortar, at the 9 missing feet Frank Weller had hidden in plain sight. Then he heard an engine outside, far away, slow, coming up the road. Earl killed the flashlight again. The cellar went black. Above him, the cabin held its breath. The old floorboards did not creak now. Even Maverick had gone still, and that told Earl more than any sound could have. The engine crawled closer, low and careful, not the careless rattle of a local pickup bouncing over ruts. This was smoother. He could hear tires grinding wet gravel at the washed-out bend, then stopping where the road collapsed. A door opened. One, then another. Earl's thumb found the knife at his belt. It was not much. 3 inches of worn steel, more tool than weapon, but his hand knew how to hold it. Maverick gave one soft huff from above. Not panic, position. Earl moved up the ladder 1 rung at a time. The cabin light came through the trapdoor in a thin gray square. He eased his head above the floor and saw Maverick standing between the fireplace and the front door, body low, ears locked forward. Outside, men were talking. Their voices were muffled by rain and timber, but one word reached the cabin clean. Weller. Earl stayed below the floor line. A second voice answered, too low to catch. Then a sharp laugh. Not friendly. Boots moved through mud somewhere beyond the clearing, but they did not come to the porch. Earl waited, counting breaths, counting steps, measuring distance by sound. The men stopped near the edge of the trees. One of them coughed. A truck door shut. The engine started again. The vehicle backed slowly, turned, and faded down the road. Only when the forest swallowed the sound completely did Maverick let out a breath and look toward Earl. Earl climbed out of the cellar and closed the trapdoor without letting it slam. Rain whispered against the roof. He crossed to the window and looked through a split between boards. No vehicle. No men. Just wet pines and gray mist hanging low between trunks. But the place no longer felt empty. It felt watched. Earl stood there a long time, one hand resting on Maverick's head. The dog's fur was damp at the ears. His muscles were still hard beneath Earl's palm. "They didn't come for me," Earl said quietly. Maverick stared toward the trees. They came for Frank. That afternoon, Earl worked with the windows covered and the front door barred by a 2x4 wedged under the handle. He did not hurry. Hurrying got men hurt. He cleared the kitchen table, laid out what he had. Hammer, pry bar, hatchet, rusted chisel, one half-dead headlamp, the 10-pound sledge from the shed, and a pair of work gloves stiff with old oil. Before touching the wall, he checked the cabin again. Front approach, back approach, tree line, ground beneath windows. He took ash from the cold fireplace and dusted it lightly across the porch boards and the dirt near the back door. Anyone stepping there would leave a story. Maverick followed, limping but focused. Earl changed the towel on his paw, cleaned the split nail with boiled water, and wrapped it with a strip of his own shirt. "Off duty," Earl told him. Maverick ignored that completely. By late afternoon, Earl descended into the cellar with the sledge. The air below was colder than before. The cinder block wall seemed to sit there with a kind of stubborn patience, waiting to see if he still had the nerve. He set the headlamp on a joist, angled the beam across the center of the wall, and studied the blocks. Never hit blind. He checked the joists again. They ran over the wall without bearing on it. The chimney mass sat on its own stone pier, older and separate. The cinder block was a skin, a lie, built to hide, not hold. Earl touched the wall once with his gloved hand. Then he swung. The sledgehammer hit with a dull, brutal crack. Dust burst into the air. The sound punched through the cellar and up through his ribs. For 1 second, the wall became a concrete barrier outside Kandahar, and the crack became the first blast of the morning, the one that took Sergeant Willis off his feet before anyone saw the wire. Earl froze with the hammer still raised, his jaw locked. Dust drifted in the headlamp beam like smoke. Above him, Maverick barked once. A short, sharp sound. Earl lowered the hammer. His boots were planted in Idaho mud. His hands were old. Willis had been gone 19 years. The wall was still in front of him. He swung again. This time he stayed in the room. The second blow spiderwebbed the block. The third broke it open. Chunks fell inward, not outward, disappearing into a dark space beyond. Cold air breathed through the hole. It carried the smell of machine oil, paper, metal, and something sealed away from weather for a very long time. Earl stepped back. Maverick was at the trap door now, whining low. "No," Earl said. "You stay." The dog lowered himself to the floor, but did not take his eyes off the opening. Earl widened the hole slowly. Hit. Wait. Listen. Hit again. He worked like a man clearing rubble where someone might still be alive beneath it. Each block removed made the darkness behind the wall larger. When the opening was wide enough, Earl pushed the broken pieces aside and aimed the flashlight through. The beam did not travel far. It struck another wall. Smooth. Steel gray. Earl crouched and stepped through the broken cinder block. His boots landed on dry concrete. The hidden room was square, maybe 8 feet by 8 feet, exactly where the missing space should have been. No cobwebs, no rot, no animal tracks. The air was dead still except for the faint draft moving from somewhere unseen. At the far end stood a door. Not a safe, not a cellar hatch, a door. Heavy steel, set into a reinforced frame, almost 7 feet tall. Its surface was dark with age but not rusted through. Bolts ran along the edges. A wheel handle sat at chest height, thick and round, built for hands wearing gloves. Above it, scratched into the paint with something sharp, were words carved by a man who wanted them read. If they come back, do not trust the uniform. Earl's mouth went dry. He reached toward the letters but stopped before touching them. Behind him, Maverick gave a low, mournful sound from above the cellar, the kind of sound a dog makes when it smells a storm before the sky changes. Earl stood in the hidden room, the broken wall at his back, the steel door in front of him, and the words pulling old cold through his bones. He had spent years obeying uniforms, wearing one, trusting one, bleeding beside men in them. Now a dead man had carved a warning into steel beneath a forgotten cabin in the Idaho woods. Outside, rain ticked softly against the roof. Inside, behind the door, something waited without making a sound. Earl did not open the door that day. A younger man might have grabbed the wheel and pulled until something gave. A frightened man might have run to town and told the first person with a badge. Earl did neither. He stood in the small concrete room for a long time, letting the flashlight beam rest on the carved warning. If they come back, do not trust the uniform. The words did not feel like a message. They felt like an order left by someone who knew he would not be there to give it himself. Earl stepped closer to the steel door, but not close enough to touch. He looked first at the floor, then the hinges, then the ceiling corners, then the thin black line around the frame. Old training moved through him without ceremony. Low, high, edges, shadows, anything too clean, anything out of place. There was no tripwire he could see, no pressure plate, no fresh tool marks. The steel wheel was coated in dust except for a faint ring near the center, where air had moved over the years. The door had not been opened in a long time. Maybe since Frank Weller died. Maybe longer. Above him, Maverick gave a soft bark from the kitchen. "Not yet," Earl called. The dog barked again. This time it was sharper. Earl backed out of the hidden room, stepped through the broken cinder block wall, and climbed into the cabin. Maverick stood by the fireplace, injured paw held slightly above the floor, eyes locked on Earl's face. "What?" The dog turned, limped to the cellar opening, then back to the fireplace. He lowered his nose and sniffed along the stones, then walked toward the kitchen wall and stopped beside a pile of cracked floorboards Earl had pulled up earlier. Earl followed. Maverick pushed his nose behind a loose strip of baseboard. There was a hollow scrape. Earl knelt, slid his knife under the wood, and pried. The baseboard came free with a dry pop. Behind it was not wall. It was a narrow pocket cut into the framing, hidden beneath dust and mouse droppings. Inside sat a small metal box, no bigger than a lunch pail, wrapped in oilcloth that had turned stiff with age. Earl glanced at Maverick. The dog sat, breathing through his nose, as if waiting for the obvious to be acknowledged. "Well," Earl muttered, "you're getting hard to argue with." The box was heavy for its size. Its latch had rust on it, but not enough to stop him. Earl carried it to the kitchen table and unwrapped the oilcloth carefully. Inside was a folded photograph, a brass key, and a waterproof note card sealed in plastic. The photograph showed 6 men standing in front of a concrete structure, half buried into a hillside. All wore work jackets. 2 had hard hats. 1 wore an army field jacket with no visible name tape. On the back, in faded blue ink, someone had written, "Weller Crew, 1981. Site 12B. Earl recognized Frank Weller from the property records only because Clara had described him once. Tall, spare, with a long face and eyes that never settled. In the photo, Frank stood at the edge of the group, not smiling, one hand resting on a rolled blueprint. The note card held 4 numbers, a sequence, then 1 sentence. "If the dog found this, the air is still moving." Earl read it twice. The room seemed to tilt slightly, not from fear, but from the strange feeling of being expected by a dead man. Maverick lowered his head onto the edge of Earl's knee. Earl took the brass key between thumb and forefinger. It was not for the steel door. Too small. Cabinet key, maybe. Or a lockbox. But the number sequence made the next step clear. He waited until afternoon. Not because he wanted to, because the body makes mistakes when the mind is moving too fast. He boiled water, cleaned Maverick's paw again, ate beans from the can, checked the ash near the porch and found no new prints, listened to the road, watched the tree line. Only when the forest settled into the dull hush before evening did he take the note card, flashlight, and a crowbar down into the cellar. Maverick followed this time. Earl did not stop him. The dog moved slowly through the broken wall, nose low, injured paw careful on the concrete. When he reached the steel door, he sat beside it like he had been assigned the post. Earl studied the wheel and the small mechanical keypad mounted beneath a rusting metal flap. He wiped dust away with his sleeve. 4 number buttons. No electricity. Mechanical. Old and simple. The kind built to outlive the people who trusted it. He entered the sequence. The first button resisted. The second clicked. The third stuck, then gave. The fourth sank with a sound like a tiny bone breaking. Something shifted inside the door. Deep, heavy. Earl put both hands on the wheel. His shoulder complained before the steel did. He tightened his grip, planted his boots, and pulled. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door groaned. The sound rolled through the hidden room and into Earl's chest. Metal waking after decades, hinges remembering weight, air moving from a place that had been sealed away from weather, animals, and men. The door opened 3 inches. Cold air touched his face. Maverick stood. Earl pulled again. The door swung wider. The flashlight beam entered first. No gold, no stacks of cash, no treasure chest waiting for some foolish dream. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, each packed with gray document boxes, rolled maps, sealed plastic cases, and metal ammunition cans that had been repainted black and labeled with white stencil codes. A shortwave radio sat on a desk beneath a green canvas cover. Beside it were coils of wire, vacuum tubes, a hand-crank generator, and a row of cassette tapes in cracked plastic cases. On the back wall, pinned beneath clear plastic, was a large map of northern Idaho and western Montana. Red grease pencil circles marked parcels of timberland, old access roads, water lines, and abandoned federal survey points. Earl stepped inside. The air smelled of dust, oil, paper, and cold steel. Maverick moved beside him, nose working from box to box. He paused at one shelf, sniffed hard, then gave a low whine. Earl lifted the nearest folder. The label had faded, but the typed words were still readable. Federal Reserve Land Transfer Review, 1984. Beneath it sat another folder. Cold storage sites, water access, civil continuity project. He opened the third box. Inside were property records, carbon copies, old survey maps, and lists of names. Farmers, widows, veterans, county parcels circled and recircled, some marked with red stamps that read, acquired, disputed, or pressured. Earl's pulse slowed in the way it did when a situation became too big for panic. Then he found the newer folder. It did not match the others. Cleaner paper, modern tabs, printed email chains, corporate diagrams. Across the front, written in black marker, were 3 words. Black pine timber. Earl stopped breathing. He opened it. The first page showed a land acquisition map stretching across Montana and Idaho. The second listed holding companies. The third listed distressed owners, medical debt, tax liens, foreclosure risk, Veteran status. Earl's own name was not on the first page, but he knew that logo. He had seen it on the letterhead taped to the door of the Missoula house after June died. Black Pine Timber had not just bought land near him, they had been following men like him. Maverick pressed against his leg, steady and warm. Earl turned another page. At the bottom, under a section marked Priority Acquisition Corridors, one parcel was circled in red. Weller Spur Property. Current owner, Earl Dawson. Recommended action. Monitor immediately. Earl read the line until the words stopped looking like words. Monitor immediately. Not review. Not contact. Not negotiate. Monitor. The paper made a small sound in his hand, a dry tremor he did not feel until Maverick pressed his shoulder against Earl's knee. The dog's injured paw was still wrapped, one edge of the cloth dark where the split nail had bled through. His eyes stayed on the open vault, but his body leaned into Earl as if holding the old man upright. Earl folded the page once and slid it into the inside pocket of his jacket. Then he did what panic never allowed a man to do. He slowed down. He photographed nothing. He called no one. He did not drag the boxes upstairs and scatter them across the kitchen table like treasure. He closed the folder, put it back exactly where he found it, studied the shelf labels, counted boxes, noted the position of the radio, the tapes, the map, the newer files. Then he shut the vault door. The steel groaned back into place, sealing the cold room and its truth behind him. The wheel turned under his palms with a heavy finality. Only after the lock settled did Earl breathe. "Mav," he said quietly. The dog looked up. "We don't know the AO yet." Outside, the rain had ended. By morning, the temperature dropped hard. The first snow came thin and quiet, no storm behind it, just a pale dusting over the clearing, the porch, the cut stumps, the broken road. Earl stood in the doorway with a tin cup of coffee and watched it settle. Snow told the truth better than mud. It remembered every step. He moved before the light got strong. First the porch. The ash he had dusted near the door was undisturbed. Then the back path. No boot prints. No broken latch. No sign anyone had come close in the night. But near the tree line, beyond the place where he had marked 3 stones beside the spring trail, Maverick stopped. The dog's head lowered. Earl saw the track a second later. Not deer, a boot. Only half a print, pressed near a root where the snow had collected deeper. Large sole, lug pattern, fresh enough that the edges were clean. Earl crouched, careful not to touch it. One print meant nothing. One print meant everything. He followed the line by not following it directly. Parallel movement. 10 yards offset. Eyes up more than down. A man staring at tracks forgot the trees. Maverick moved beside him with silent discipline, limping but controlled. They found 3 more prints near a fallen log, then a snapped cedar twig at shoulder height, then something that made Earl stop entirely. A brass casing. Not old. It lay in a patch of snow beneath a hemlock, partly hidden by needles. Earl picked it up with 2 fingers wrapped in cloth. 308. Hunting round, maybe. But no blood trail. No drag marks. No deer hair caught in brush. No reason for a hunter to stand there facing the cabin instead of the draw where the game moved. Maverick sniffed the casing and pulled his lips back. "Yeah," Earl whispered. "That's not for elk." A faint mechanical buzz came through the trees. Maverick heard it first. His ears snapped upward. Earl stepped behind the trunk of a cedar, pulling the dog close with 2 fingers hooked in his collar. The sound grew, thin and insect-like. A drone slid over the clearing, small, dark, 4 rotors, flying too low to be accidental. It drifted above the roofline, paused near the chimney, then moved toward the back of the cabin, as if mapping the structure. Earl did not wave, did not shout, did not give the operator a face to study. He stayed under branches, shoulders still, eyes tracking the little machine until it rose over the pines and vanished toward the washed-out road. Maverick trembled under his hand. Not fear. Restraint. Back at the cabin, Earl turned the place into something less helpless. He did not have cameras or alarms, so he used what the woods gave him. Ash across the porch again, thinner this time. Fishing line tied low between two nails near the back steps, with 3 empty bean cans hanging beneath the floor where wind would not touch them. A cracked mirror wedged inside the kitchen window so he could see the porch from the stove. Tin plates placed near the cellar door. A chair leg leaned against the front latch at an angle that would fall if the door moved. He checked Maverick's paw and saw the dog had reopened the nail walking the perimeter. "You're supposed to be healing." Maverick gave him a flat look. Earl wrapped the paw again. By noon, he hiked to where the Ford waited before the washed-out culvert. He kept to the side of the road, not the middle. At the truck, he found no damage, but there was a fresh smear on the passenger window where someone had wiped away condensation to look inside. Earl stood very still. Then he opened the door, took out his old binoculars, a roll of duct tape, and June's Bible from the glove box. The Bible went inside his jacket. He did not know why until it was there. That evening, the sky lowered into a hard gray lid. Snow thickened, tapping against the windows like dry fingers. Earl ate standing up, one ear turned toward the woods. Maverick lay near the stove, but his head never dropped fully. At 9:43, the cans under the back steps moved. Not loud, just one small clink. Earl's hand closed around the hatchet on the table. Maverick was already standing. Another clink. Then silence. Earl moved without turning on the flashlight. He knew the room now. 3 steps to the kitchen wall. Hand along the counter. Duck beneath the window. Pause. Maverick crossed ahead of him, body low. The back door handle moved. Slowly. Once. The chair leg Earl had set against it slipped and hit the floor. A dark shape filled the narrow window. Maverick launched. The door burst inward only 6 inches before the German Shepherd hit it like a hammer. A man shouted. The beam of a flashlight swung wildly across the kitchen ceiling. Earl caught a glimpse of a gloved hand, a dark sleeve, and a blade flashing near the doorframe. Maverick! The dog drove forward through the gap, teeth locked onto the intruder's forearm. The man cursed and slammed Maverick against the door jamb. Earl reached the doorway and brought the hatchet down hard into the wood beside the man's hand, close enough to split the trim. Back off! The man tore away. Maverick did not let go. For one awful second, Earl saw the blade move again. A sharp yelp ripped through the snow-dark cabin. The intruder stumbled backward off the steps, dragging Maverick half with him. Earl lunged, grabbed the dog's collar, and shouted the word that still lived deeper than thought. Clear! Maverick released instantly. The man fell into the snow, scrambled up, and ran for the trees, one arm clutched to his chest. Another figure moved beyond him, already retreating. No shots, no voices, only boots crashing through brush. Earl did not chase. A man alone did not chase into timber at night. He shut the door and dropped the bar across it. Then he looked down. Maverick stood in the kitchen, legs braced, blood running from a deep cut across his shoulder. His ears were still forward. His teeth were still bared at the door. Earl's hatchet slipped from his hand and hit the floor. No, no, no. He eased the dog down beside the stove. Maverick resisted at first, still trying to stand guard, until Earl put both hands on his head. Down, soldier. Down. The dog obeyed. Earl tore open his duffel, pulled out a clean shirt, boiled water, found the little first aid roll he had carried since the truck stop days. His hands wanted to shake. He bit the inside of his cheek until they stopped. The cut was ugly, but not as deep as it first looked. Shoulder muscle. Blood, but not pumping. Earl pressed cloth into it while Maverick breathed hard through his nose, eyes fixed on the back door. Outside, the snow erased the intruders' tracks even as they fled. Inside, Earl tied the bandage tight. Maverick gave one low whine and pushed his nose against Earl's wrist. Earl bowed his head until his forehead touched the dog's. In the kitchen mirror, behind them, the broken door hung crooked on its hinges. And beneath the floor, sealed behind steel, the vault suddenly felt less like a secret. It felt like bait. Earl did not leave the cabin that night. He sat on the kitchen floor with Maverick's head in his lap, one hand pressed over the bandage on the dog's shoulder, the other resting on the handle of the hatchet. The back door was barred with a plank torn from the broken porch rail. Snow tapped the crooked window. The little stove gave off just enough heat to keep the room from turning bitter. Maverick slept in pieces. Every few minutes, his ears twitched. His lips moved around some quiet dream. Once, his legs kicked as if he were running, and Earl laid a hand on his ribs until the dog stilled. "Easy," Earl whispered. "You held the line." The words left a taste in his mouth. Held the line. Men said things like that when they had no better way to thank the living for not becoming the dead. Near dawn, Earl rose stiffly and checked the porch. Snow had covered most of the tracks, but not all. At the edge of the steps, where Maverick had hit the intruder, dark drops marked the white boards. Blood led away in a broken trail toward the trees, then vanished where the snow deepened. Earl did not follow far. The men who had come in darkness knew the land enough to retreat. They knew the cabin enough to choose the back door. They knew something was worth risking a dog's teeth for. That was enough. He went back inside, lifted the trapdoor, and climbed down into the cellar. The hidden room was cold. The vault waited behind its steel face, silent as a bunker after the lights went out. Earl entered the number sequence and opened it again. This time he did not stare at everything. He moved with purpose. Black pine timber folder, land acquisition maps, distressed owner lists, Frank Weller's field notes, a stack of copies marked County Recorder, one cassette tape labeled Oral Backup 3, but he left it there for now. He packed only what he could carry flat beneath his jacket and inside an old flour sack. Too much evidence made a man clumsy. Too little made him easy to ignore. Before closing the vault, he looked once more at the wall map. Red circles, blue water lines, old federal access roads, parcels clustered like pieces in a game someone else had been playing for years. Then his eyes caught a line written in grease pencil near Weller Spur. Key access to lower reservoir. Earl stared at that phrase until the cold settled between his shoulder blades. Lower reservoir. There was no reservoir on the county listing, no pond, no lake. Just 6 acres of unmanaged timber and a rotten cabin nobody wanted. Maverick whined softly from above. Earl shut the vault. By mid-morning, he had reinforced the back door, wrapped Maverick's shoulder again, and made a decision he did not like. He had to go into town. Maverick did not want to be left. The dog stood on 3 good legs near the door, eyes hard, body angled toward the trail. "You're bleeding through," Earl said. Maverick stared. "I know." The dog took 1 step. Earl sighed. "All right. Slow march." The walk to the truck took twice as long as before. Snow softened the ruts, and Earl stopped often to let Maverick rest. The dog never lay down. He stood each time, breathing steam, shoulder bandage spotted red, watching the trees as though pain were just bad weather. The Ford started after 3 tries. Pine Hollow looked smaller under snow. Smoke curled from chimneys. The yellow light inside Bennett's market glowed against the gray morning like a memory of warmth. Clara saw Maverick through the window and was already coming around the counter when Earl opened the door. "Oh, Lord," she said. "It's not as bad as it looks." She gave him a look that would have made a younger man apologize. "Back room," she said. "Now." Clara cleaned the wound with steady hands. Maverick allowed it because Earl's hand stayed on his neck. The dog flinched once when the antiseptic touched the cut, but he did not growl. Clara worked quietly, lips pressed thin, silver hair slipping loose near her temple. "Knife?" she asked. "Looked like it." "Who?" "Didn't stop to trade names." Clara wrapped fresh gauze around Maverick's shoulder and secured it with tape from the store shelf. "You need a vet. I need a lawyer first." Her hands paused. Earl set the flour sack on the small table beside a stack of canned peaches. He took out 3 documents and laid them flat. Clara did not touch them right away. She read standing. The first page changed her face. The second made her sit down. "Black pine," she said quietly. Earl nodded. Clara looked toward the front of the store, though no one else was there. "My son used to say companies don't need guns anymore. They use forms." "Your son military?" "Marines. Helmand Province." Came back with one good knee and a laugh that sounded different. She swallowed once. "He passed 6 years ago. Pills first, silence after." Earl said nothing. There were griefs that did not want company, only room. Clara tapped one finger against the document. "Ben Harlan is the only lawyer in town who ever stood up to them. Can he be trusted?" He filed for 3 ranch families Black Pine tried to squeeze with road easements. Lost 2, saved 1. That made him unpopular with important people. Good. Ben Harlan's office sat above a closed barber shop, reached by a narrow stairwell that smelled of dust and old pipe tobacco. He was younger than Earl expected, maybe mid-40s, with tired eyes, rolled sleeves, and a desk buried beneath case folders. He looked at Maverick first, then Earl, then Clara. "This feels like the start of something expensive," he said. Earl placed the Weller files on his desk, then read fast. Ben did. At first, his expression was professional, then cautious, then completely still. He turned page after page without speaking. Corporate holdings, shell companies, forced acquisitions, medical debt flags, tax lien tracking, internal notes about elderly owners, isolated widows, veterans with unstable income, families behind on farm loans. Finally, he leaned back. "Where did you get these?" "Frank Weller's house. The old cabin." "My house now." Ben looked at him sharply. Earl held his gaze. Outside the window, snow slid from the barber shop awning in a soft rush. Ben turned another page and stopped. His jaw tightened. "What?" Clara asked. Ben did not answer at first. He rotated the document toward Earl. It was a medical expense summary. June Dawson's name sat near the top of the page, typed cleanly in black ink. Beneath it were dates, lien notices, property tax penalties, and a note in the margin. Target vulnerable. Spouse deceased. Likely unable to contest foreclosure. Black Pine Timber Priority Corridor, Western Montana. Earl did not move. The room narrowed. The radiator hiss became radio static. The gray light through the window became desert glare. Paper became sand. His pulse beat once, slow and heavy behind his eyes. Maverick pushed his head under Earl's hand. The old man's fingers closed in the dog's fur. June's name sat there, neat and dead and used. Not mourned. Used. Ben's voice came from far away. Mr. Dawson. Earl blinked. The office returned. Ben folded his hands, carefully, like he knew sudden movements were a bad idea. This isn't just land fraud, he said. This is targeting. Patterned, documented, interstate. If these records are real, Black Pine has been using shell companies to force people off land for years. Clara's face had gone pale. Earl looked down at June's name. His voice came out low. They didn't just take my house. No one spoke. Maverick leaned harder against his leg. Earl slid the page back into the folder with 2 fingers. Ben reached for a legal pad. We need copies. Multiple sets. I know someone at the state level, but we move carefully. If Frank Weller hid these, he had a reason. If someone came to your cabin last night, they already know something surfaced. Earl looked toward the window. Across the snowy street, a black SUV sat idling beside the feed store. Clean tires, tinted glass. No one got out. Ben followed his gaze and stopped writing. Clara whispered, "That's not local." Maverick rose slowly, despite the bandage, and gave a low growl that filled the little office like thunder under the floor. Earl gathered the folder. Then we're done talking in windows. Ben Harlan moved first. He crossed the office and pulled the blinds down with one hard tug. The room dimmed at once, the black SUV outside reduced to a dark smear behind slats of plastic. Clara locked the office door. Maverick stayed standing, shoulder bandage tight against his coat, his growl fading into a low vibration Earl could feel through the floorboards. Ben took the folder from Earl and slid it beneath a loose board behind his desk. Originals stay hidden, he said. Copies travel. Earl looked at him. You have a copier? In the basement. Old machine. Sounds like a tractor, but it works. They spent the next 40 minutes below the barber shop, feeding page after page through a copier that groaned and flashed white light across the concrete room. Each burst made Earl's eyes tighten. Once, when the machine jammed and snapped like a small shot, his shoulder hit the wall before he knew he had moved. Maverick came to him at once, limping across the cement and pressing his head against Earl's thigh. Ben saw it. He said nothing. That helped. By the time they were done, 3 sets of documents sat in separate envelopes. Ben kept one. Clara tucked one inside a flour sack beneath canned peaches in her market delivery box. Earl carried the smallest set under his jacket, close to June's Bible. They left through the rear stairs. The black SUV was gone. That did not make Earl feel better. The drive back to Weller Spur was slow, the road silver with thawing snow. Clara insisted on following in her old green Jeep with groceries, bandages, and kerosene. Earl told her not to. She told him she had stopped taking orders from stubborn men after her husband died. Maverick rode in the front seat with his head lifted, refusing to lie down. Halfway up the road, Earl pulled over. "What is it?" Clara called through her cracked window. Earl pointed. On the roadside, a fresh branch lay across the mud, snapped clean at both ends. Not fallen. Placed. A marker for someone coming after dark. Earl got out, moved it into the brush, then dragged a heavier limb across a different spot 20 yards farther up. Clara watched him. "You always think like that?" "No," Earl said. "Sometimes I sleep." She did not laugh. At the cabin, the clearing looked untouched, but Earl did not trust untouched. He checked the ash lines, the back door, the cellar hatch, and the trees behind the spring before letting Clara bring supplies inside. She stood in the living room, looking at the fireplace, the warped floorboards, the broken porch rail braced against the back door. "This place has poor manners," she said. "It's improving." Maverick lowered himself beside the stove with a careful grunt. Earl knelt, checked the bandage, and found fresh red at the edge. "You keep saving my hide. I'm going to run out of shirts." The dog blinked slowly. Near dusk, Headlights washed across the front window. Not sudden, not hidden. A vehicle came right up the washed-out road as far as it could, then stopped. A door opened and closed. No rushing, no shouting. One man walking with the confidence of someone used to being allowed through gates. Earl looked through the mirror wedged by the kitchen window. Black SUV, clean. A man stood at the edge of the clearing in a dark wool coat, no hat despite the cold. Late 40s, maybe 50. Gray at the temples, polished boots already muddy at the edges, though he seemed personally offended by that fact. Clara moved toward the stove. Earl held up 2 fingers. Stay. Maverick rose anyway. Earl opened the front door but did not step onto the porch. He stayed inside the frame, where shadow kept most of him back. The man smiled as if they were meeting at a bank. Mr. Dawson? Earl said nothing. Nolan Pierce. Black pine timber. He lifted one gloved hand, empty. I'm not here to cause trouble. Maverick's lips lifted. Nolan's eyes dropped to the dog, then returned to Earl. I heard there was an incident last night. That's unfortunate. Remote properties attract desperate people. Do they? They can. Nolan glanced at the cabin. May I? No. The smile held, but something behind it cooled. Fair enough. I'll be brief. He reached inside his coat slowly and pulled out an envelope. Black Pine is expanding a conservation-based timber management corridor through this area. Your parcel sits in a difficult position. We'd like to make you an offer. Earl watched his hands. Not selling. You haven't heard the number. Didn't ask for one. Nolan took a step closer. Maverick's growl deepened. The man stopped. Mr. Dawson, you served your country. Iraq, Afghanistan, Army engineers. I looked you up. Behind Earl, Clara's breath caught softly. Earl did not blink. Nolan continued, voice smooth as oiled wood. You've done enough hard living. This cabin is unsafe. The road is gone. Winter will make this hill nearly impossible. Let someone else handle the burden. He held out the envelope. $50,000. Cashier's check by morning. More than fair for 6 acres and a rotten structure. Earl looked at the envelope. He thought of the truck stop, the half pills, the cold windshield, June's lavender pulled up by strangers, Maverick bleeding on the kitchen floor, June's name typed into a file like a weak point in a wall. Your company know my wife's medical bills too? He asked. For the first time, Nolan's face changed, only a flicker, but Earl saw it. So did Maverick. The dog stepped forward, shoulders stiff, eyes locked not on Nolan's face but on his right hand, and Nolan slowly lowered the envelope onto the porch rail. I don't know what you think you found, he said quietly. But old men alone in old cabins sometimes misunderstand paperwork. Earl stepped fully into the doorway. Snow began falling again, thin and dry between them. I'm not alone. Maverick stood beside his boot. Inside, Clara's shadow moved just enough to be seen. Nolan's jaw tightened. Think carefully. I did. Earl picked up the envelope, opened it, and saw the check inside, clean and heavy with promise. Then he turned, walked to the stove, and fed it into the fire. The paper curled black. Nolan watched from the porch. When the last corner disappeared, Earl looked back at him. Road's bad after dark. Nolan's smile was gone now. He walked away without another word. His SUV reversed slowly down the track, red taillights fading between the trees. That night, the cabin lost power, though no storm had hit yet. An hour later, Earl and Clara found a tree dropped clean across the only road out. The tree had not fallen. Earl knew that before he touched it. Pine did not snap that neat under its own weight. The cut was low, fresh, and angled with purpose. Sap still shined pale in the beam of Clara's flashlight. The trunk lay across the road like a gate, branches tangled into the ditch on both sides, too heavy for two people and one injured dog to drag clear. Clara stood beside him in the falling snow, her coat collar pulled up around her ears. "Wind didn't do that," she said. "No." Maverick limped to the edge of the road and sniffed the cut end. His hackles rose, not high, just enough. Earl looked past the tree into the dark timber. No lights, no engine, no voices. That was worse. "They wanted us to find it," Clara said. Earl turned off his flashlight. The darkness folded around them. Clara went still. "What are you doing?" "Not helping whoever's watching." A long second passed. Then Clara clicked hers off too. The woods came alive in the dark, snow whispering through needles, water moving under ice somewhere down the slope, the small click of Maverick's nails on frozen gravel. Earl listened. North side, nothing. Downhill, nothing. East ridge, a faint scrape. Metal on bark. Earl raised one hand, palm down. Clara froze without being told twice. Maverick's head turned toward the ridge behind the cabin. Earl touched two fingers to his own eyes, then pointed toward the house. Clara nodded. She had never served, but she understood danger when it stopped pretending. They moved back slow, not along the open road, but through the brush beside it. Earl kept one hand near Maverick's collar. The dog wanted to move faster. Pain and age had not touched his willingness. At the clearing, the cabin sat black against the snow, no light in the windows, no smoke from the chimney. It looked abandoned again, a place waiting to be reclaimed by trees. Earl did not like how quiet it was. Inside, he barred the door and placed Clara in the safest corner of the living room, away from windows, behind the thick side of the stone fireplace. "Stay low," he said. She looked toward Maverick's bandage. "And you?" "I'll be low too." The power line outside had been cut. Earl found it near the back wall, the loose wire hanging from its bracket like a dead vine. He did not touch it. Whoever had cut it knew enough to avoid killing themselves and enough to darken the cabin before coming. That made them either practiced or stupid with confidence. Both were dangerous. The first sound came at 10:31. A soft thump behind the shed. Earl was already on the floor. Not because he fell, because floors kept men alive. He crawled to the kitchen wall, shoulder brushing old boards, breath shallow. Maverick moved beside him with the strange silence of a wounded animal still choosing work. Clara stayed behind the fireplace, one hand pressed over her mouth, eyes fixed on Earl. A glow flickered outside. Orange, then another. Earl smelled it before he saw the flames. Kerosene. "They're burning the woodpile," Clara whispered. "Not the pile." Earl watched through the crack beside the kitchen door. The old lean-to behind the cabin had caught first. Flames licked up dry pine kindling stacked under the roof, then reached toward the wall where the siding was oldest. Smoke pushed under the eaves, gray and quick. They were not trying to warm the place. They were trying to flush him out. A shadow moved beyond the fire. Then another. Two men. One near the shed. One by the spring trail. Earl's mouth went dry, but his hands stayed useful. He took the small mirror from the window, angled it low, and caught the reflection of the back clearing. The man near the shed wore a dark jacket and a knit cap. The other held something long, not raised, but ready. Earl did not wait for the cabin to fill with smoke. He pulled Clara across the floor toward the cellar hatch. "Down." "No, Earl, down." The tone did it. She climbed into the cellar, shaking but moving. Earl lowered Maverick next, supporting the dog's chest while the German Shepherd fought him for balance. Easy, easy. A flaming piece of siding cracked outside and fell. The sound hit Earl like a flashbang. White burst behind his eyes. For 1 second, the kitchen ceiling became a night sky over Afghanistan. Smoke, shouting, radio static, someone yelling contact left. A young man's hand slipping out of his grip. Maverick barked, one hard bark from the cellar. Earl came back on his knees with the hatchet in his hand and the cabin filling with smoke. "Clear," he rasped. He dropped into the cellar and pulled the hatch nearly shut above him, leaving a narrow black slit. Smoke slid through it in thin ribbons. Clara crouched against the stone foundation, coughing into her sleeve. What now? Earl moved to the broken cinder block opening. The vault room has concrete. He led them through the jagged gap into the hidden space. The steel vault door stood closed, but the small room outside it gave them cover from the worst of the smoke. Earl pulled the old canvas tarp from a shelf, soaked part of it from a water jug, and handed a wet corner to Clara. Breathe through that. Maverick pressed against the floor, ears forward. Above them, boots hit the porch. The front door shook. One of the men shouted something muffled. Earl motioned Clara behind the steel doorframe. He killed the flashlight. In darkness, his breathing slowed into something old and practiced. Wait. Let them enter. Let the room speak first. The hatch opened above. Light cut down into the cellar. A boot appeared on the ladder. Maverick moved before Earl could stop him. Not toward the intruder, toward Earl. The dog slammed his body against Earl's legs just as a section of burned flooring overhead gave way. A flaming board crashed down where Earl had been crouched, bursting sparks across the concrete. Maverick yelped as embers struck his bandaged shoulder, but he drove Earl backward into the vault doorway. The intruder cursed. Clara screamed his name. Earl hit the wall hard, shoulder first. Pain flashed white. He rolled, grabbed the water jug, and threw it against the burning board. Steam exploded up, filling the cellar. Maverick staggered, fur smoking at the edges of the bandage. Earl crawled to him. "Stay with me, stay." Above, someone shouted, "Forget it! Move!" Boots retreated. A second later, the front door slammed. An engine roared somewhere beyond the trees. The men were leaving because fire had become less controllable than fear. But the cabin was still burning. Earl and Clara worked in smoke and dark for 20 minutes that felt like a year. Buckets from the spring. Snow packed into glowing seams. Wet blankets over the back wall. Clara moved like a woman half her age, coughing, eyes streaming, refusing to stop. Earl's lungs burned, his hands blistered. Maverick tried to stand twice and collapsed both times. By midnight, the fire was out. Part of the kitchen floor had collapsed near the back wall, leaving a black hole of charred joists and wet ash. Snow blew through the broken door. The cabin smelled of smoke, soaked wood, and burned pine. Earl knelt beside Maverick near the stove and wrapped the dog's shoulder again with the last clean flannel shirt he owned. His fingers shook so badly he had to pull the knot tight with his teeth. Maverick watched him, breathing hard. "You pulled me out," Earl whispered. "Again." The dog's tail moved once against the floor. Clara stood near the collapsed section of kitchen, holding the flashlight with both hands. "Earl," she said. There was something in her voice that made him look up. Beneath the burned-out floor, below a layer of ash and broken boards, metal reflected the beam. Not the vault door, something smaller. A steel chest, half buried in the dirt beneath the kitchen, its top blackened by smoke but intact. On it was a strip of old white tape, yellowed at the edges. Earl rose slowly, every joint protesting. He stepped closer. The writing on the tape had survived the fire. Weller final recording. Do not open until the house is no longer safe. Earl looked at Clara, then down at Maverick. Outside, sirens finally began to wail far away in the mountain dark. The sirens never made it all the way to the cabin. They stopped at the fallen tree. Red light flickered through the timber below the ridge, dull and broken by trunks, while men shouted in the distance and chainsaws coughed against wet wood. Earl stood on the porch with Clara's coat over his shoulders, smoke still lifting from the cabin behind him in thin gray ribbons. Maverick lay inside by the stove. He had finally stopped trying to stand. That bothered Earl more than the fire. A volunteer firefighter reached them near 2 a.m, breathing hard, helmet light bobbing. His name was Caleb Rusk. Earl had seen him once at the gas pump in town. Caleb took one look at the cut power line, the burned lean-to, the collapsed kitchen floor, and then at Earl's face. This wasn't lightning, he said. No. Caleb looked toward Clara. You hurt? Coughing. Nothing broken. His eyes moved to Maverick. Dog needs a vet. He needs a road first. Caleb swallowed whatever he had been about to say and turned back toward the trees. We'll clear it. By sunrise, the road was open enough for Clara's Jeep to pass. She drove Maverick into town wrapped in Earl's blanket, one hand on the wheel, one hand reaching back every few seconds to touch the dog's flank. Earl wanted to go with them, but Clara stopped him at the door. You leave that box here alone, and all of this was for nothing. Earl looked at the steel chest beneath the ruined floor, then at Maverick, whose eyes followed him from the back seat. I'll come, Earl said to the dog. Maverick blinked once. The Jeep disappeared down the road, leaving tracks through gray slush. The cabin was quiet after that. Too quiet. Earl worked in the kind of silence that came after blasts. He covered the hole in the roof with tarp, shoveled wet ash away from the kitchen, checked the vault, checked the tree line, checked the road. Then he knelt beside the steel chest and cleared the last burned boards from around it. The chest was bolted to 2 iron straps sunk into the dirt. Frank Weller had meant for it to survive the house. Earl used a hacksaw from the shed, slow stroke after slow stroke, until his palms burned. When the second strap gave, the chest shifted with a heavy scrape. He carried it to the living room table. The latch opened with the small brass key Maverick had found behind the baseboard. Inside sat a cassette recorder wrapped in waxed canvas, 3 tapes, a sealed letter, and a hand-drawn map. The recorder was old but clean. Beside it was a packet of batteries still sealed in plastic, dated 1996. Earl sat down. His back hurt. His eyes burned. His hands smelled of smoke and blood and metal. He put in the first tape. The recorder clicked. Static filled the room. Then a man's voice rose out of it, thin with age, but steady. If this tape is being played, the house is either compromised or burning. I expected one, maybe both. Earl did not move. The voice continued. My name is Franklin Weller, civil engineer, contract surveyor, former site planner for the Northern Continuity Reserve Project. If you found the vault, you already know enough to be in danger. A faint cough on the tape, paper rustling. Black pine timber is not after lumber. Never was. Timber is the cover story. The real value under this ridge is access, water access, old federal service roads, lower reservoir control, pipeline junctions abandoned after Congress buried the project in 1987. Earl looked toward the map spread across the table. There it was. Weller Spur. A thin blue line beneath it, hidden under contour marks. They need the parcels clean, Weller said. No families, no stubborn farmers, no widows with deed boxes. No veterans with time to fight. So they create pressure, tax liens, medical debt purchases, road disputes, insurance complaints. A man sells when he believes he has no choice. Earl's jaw tightened. The tape hissed. I kept records because one day records would be the only weapon left. Some county officers were paid. Some federal men looked away. Some wore uniforms and used them like keys. That is why I carved the warning. If they come back, do not trust the uniform. Earl's eyes moved to the cellar hatch. For whoever found this, do not hand the originals to the first badge that smiles at you. Give copies to the press first, then to a lawyer, then to federal investigators outside the county chain, in that order. Light before paperwork. The tape clicked softly as it turned. Outside, snow slid from the porch roof. Earl sat with both hands flat on the table. Then Weller's voice changed. Softer now. Tired. I don't know who you are. Maybe a thief. Maybe a fool. Maybe the kind of person desperate enough to buy this place because nobody else wanted it. If you are desperate, good. Desperate people notice things comfortable people miss. Earl breathed through his nose. Trust the dog, Weller said. The room seemed to close around those 3 words. Earl leaned closer to the recorder. I built air channels from the vault to the hearth and base wall. Too narrow for a man to see. Enough for scent. Enough for a working dog to read. Machines fail. Men lie. Dogs follow what is real. A long pause. Then the final sentence. The dog will know the way before the people do. The tape ran another few seconds, empty but for static. Then it clicked off. Earl sat there until the cold crept through his boots. By mid-afternoon, Clara returned from town without Maverick. Earl was outside stacking wet boards when her Jeep pulled up. He did not ask at first. He looked through the windshield, saw the empty back seat, and his hand closed around the board until a splinter drove into his palm. Clara stepped out. He's alive. Earl's shoulders moved once. The vet sedated him, cleaned the burn, stitched the shoulder proper. He lost blood, but not too much. He'll stay overnight. Earl looked away toward the trees. Clara came closer. He tried to bite the vet when they took your blanket. The old man nodded. Good. For the first time since the fire, Clara smiled a little. Then he showed her the tape. They played it again inside the smoke-stained cabin. Clara listened without interrupting, arms folded tight against her chest. When Weller said the word press, her face changed. My daughter, she said. Earl looked at her. Rachel, Spokane, investigative reporter. She's done mining, water rights, tribal land stories. She'll know how to handle this without getting herself killed. Can you trust her? Clara's eyes sharpened. She's my child. That was answer enough. Ben arrived after dark, carrying 2 hard drives, a scanner, and a face that said he had not slept either. They copied everything by lantern light. Maps, tapes, names, shell companies, parcel histories. Ben made 3 digital sets and 1 paper set. Clara called Rachel from the satellite phone at the fire station and said only, I need you to come home. Bring a camera. Bring someone you trust. Outside, the forest settled into night. Inside, the cabin no longer felt like a ruin. It felt like a command post. Near midnight, Earl stepped onto the porch alone. The sky had cleared, and stars burned cold over the black trees. Somewhere down in town, Maverick slept under a vet's lamp with Earl's blanket under his head. Earl pulled June's Bible from his jacket and held it against his chest. For years, he had thought survival meant staying quiet, staying small, keeping his ghosts from spilling onto anyone else. Now Frank Weller's dead voice had handed him a mission. Not revenge, not money. Light before paperwork. Earl looked toward the dark road where men had come for the vaulted and found an old soldier, a grieving woman, and a wounded dog instead. Clear enough, he whispered. But at the edge of the timber, far beyond the porch light, something moved once between the trees and disappeared. Earl did not chase the shadow. A younger man might have gone after it with a flashlight and anger. Earl had buried too many younger men to trust anger in the dark. He stayed on the porch, one hand inside his jacket, watching the trees until the shape did not return. Behind him, the cabin breathed smoke through its wounded walls. Inside, Clara and Ben worked under lantern light, feeding Frank Weller's files into scanners, sealing copies into padded envelopes, labeling drives with hands that moved fast but careful. The old A-frame no longer looked like a forgotten ruin. It looked like a place holding its last line before dawn. By morning, Rachel Bennett arrived from Spokane in a mud-splattered news van with a camera operator, a field producer, and the kind of face Earl recognized from women who had stopped asking permission a long time ago. She hugged Clara hard on the porch, then looked at Earl, at the burned wall, at the collapsed kitchen floor, and at the black hole where the hidden room waited beneath the house. "You're Earl Dawson," she said. He nodded. "My mother says your dog found all this." Earl looked toward the empty corner by the stove where Maverick should have been. He found what people stepped over. Rachel did not waste time. She filmed the cut power line, the sawed tree, the burned shed, the steel chest, the vault door, the files, the map, the name Black Pine Timber printed again and again across documents Frank Weller had hidden from men who thought patience died with old people. Ben spoke on camera with the documents spread across the table. Clara spoke beside the fireplace, her voice steady until she mentioned her son. Earl did not want to speak. Then Rachel placed June's medical summary on the table. The camera light clicked on. For a breath, Earl was back in a VA hallway, fluorescent bulbs buzzing overhead, June's hand small inside his. Then he felt the rough cover of her Bible in his coat pocket. His thumb found the worn edge. He looked into the camera. "My wife wasn't a weak point," he said. "She was a person." That was all he trusted himself to say. It was enough. The story broke 3 days later. Not as gossip, not as rumor, as evidence. The headline named Black Pine Timber, Shell Companies, Land Pressure Tactics, Hidden Federal Water Access, and the dead engineer who had kept receipts beneath a cabin no one wanted. Rachel's report spread from Spokane to Boise, then Montana, then national news. By nightfall, trucks from 2 federal agencies rolled into Pine Hollow. This time, Earl watched the uniforms carefully. He did not hand them the originals. Ben did. After copies had already gone everywhere. Nolan Pierce was arrested outside Black Pine's regional office before noon the following day. He wore the same clean boots and the same calm coat, but cameras caught the moment his face changed when an agent read the charges. No gunfire. No shouting, just paper, truth, and handcuffs closing over expensive sleeves. More names followed. County officers resigned. A bank auditor turned witness. Families who had been told they had no case suddenly had lawyers calling them back. Ranchers brought deed boxes out of closets. Widows brought letters folded in cookie tins. Veterans came with foreclosure notices, lien papers, medical bills, and the quiet stare of people who had spent years wondering if the wrong done to them had a name. Now it did. Black Pine Timber froze under investigation. The Weller Spur property was placed under protection, while the lower reservoir and old federal access lines were reviewed. Part of the surrounding ridge became conservation land. Another part was set aside for a small veteran housing trust funded by settlements, penalties, and money. Black pine had tried so hard to bury under paperwork. Earl received a reward, more money than he had held in his hands in his entire life. He looked at the number on the page in Ben's office and felt almost nothing at first. Then he thought of the truck stop windshield, the half pill, Maverick's body against his ribs, June's lavender torn from the porch. He folded the paper once. "What will you do?" Ben asked. Earl looked out the window at Pine Hollow's main street, where Clara was unloading dog food from her Jeep. "Fix the house," he said. "And after that?" Earl watched the mountains beyond town, blue and hard against the winter sky. "Leave the light on." By spring, the cabin no longer sagged. The roof was new cedar. The porch stood straight. The burned kitchen had been rebuilt with wide pine boards, and a stone counter Clara said was too fancy for a man who still ate beans from the can. The vault remained beneath the house, not as a secret now, but as a record room. Copies of Frank Weller's files stayed there in fireproof cabinets, beside a plaque Ben insisted on making. The truth was here before anyone believed it. Earl hated the plaque. He let it stay. The place became known quietly as Weller House, not a shelter exactly, not a clinic, not some government program with forms stacked higher than firewood. It was a place where a veteran driving too long with nowhere to stop could sleep without being asked to explain every scar. A place with coffee, dry socks, a phone that worked, and a dog bed by the stove. Maverick came home on a cold morning with stitches, a shaved patch on his shoulder, and a limp worse than before. Earl helped him down from Clara's Jeep as if lowering something holy. The dog stood in the clearing, sniffed the pine air, looked at the repaired porch, then walked straight to the front step and lay down facing the road. Clara crossed her arms. "Guess he approves." Earl sat beside him. For a while he could not speak. Maverick rested his head on Earl's boot and sighed like a tired old guard finally back at his post. Months passed. Snow pulled back from the ridge. Mud came, then green. Men and women came through Weller House with duffel bags, old service jackets, court papers, silence. Earl never pushed. He made coffee. He showed them the spring. He told them where the floor creaked. Maverick chose who needed him most and lay beside that person without asking. One night in early winter, almost a year after Earl first read the auction notice behind the Montana truck stop, snow fell again over the cabin, the kind of snow that made the whole forest listen. Earl sat near the stove, older in the face than he had been, but less hollow around the eyes. Maverick lay on the rug, scar visible beneath the regrown fur on his shoulder. A young veteran from Oregon slept in the spare room upstairs. His boots sat by the door, lined up toe out without anyone telling him. A log split in the stove with a sharp crack. Earl's hand twitched. Only once. He did not dive for the floor. He did not reach under a seat for a rifle that was not there. He did not count exits, though he knew them. Maverick lifted his head. Earl placed his palm between the dog's ears. The room held still. The snow tapped softly against the windows. The kettle breathed on the stove. Somewhere beneath the house, behind steel and concrete, Frank Weller's vault rested in the dark, empty of fear now, full of proof. Earl looked toward the fireplace where Maverick had first stared into the floor, as if the cabin itself had been speaking. "Clear," Earl said softly. Maverick's tail moved once. Outside, the forest stood black and quiet under the falling snow. And this time, nothing in the dark came for them. If you believe loyalty is worth more than money, drop a simple one in the comments. And if you think Maverick was the true hero of this story, comment Maverick so he gets the honor he deserves. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the ones who save us walk on 4 legs instead of 2. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe and turn on notifications. There are many more powerful stories of courage, survival, second chances, and unforgettable dogs waiting just ahead. Until the next story, take care of yourself. Take care of those who stand beside you, and never ignore the ones who stay loyal when the world walks away.